Wednesday, July 1st. Continued our journey this morning, marching easterly until we reached Fayetteville, then turning to the left, marched northward towards Gettysburg. As we neared the summit of the South Mountains, reports reached us of heavy fighting in our front, and we pressed rapidly forward. The boom of cannon and the roll of musketry coming from the plains beneath us betokened the bloody hour at hand, and then upon each mind fell the solemn thought of dangers soon to be encountered. Rapidly, we whirled along the smooth, firm road towards the battlefield, and soon the signs of battle began to make their appearance. Wounded men, pale from the loss of blood, were moving back towards the rear, and in many cases they were cared for by Pennsylvania women. On and on we pushed, and the men who but a short time since wearily toiled up the mountainside and struggled to keep up with their guns, now moved briskly alongside their pieces, and even the horses seemed infused with a new and lasting strength. As we reach the field of battle, night comes on and the firing ceases. We arrive too late to participate in the fight, and calmly we wait for the morrow. The moon rose over the battlefield, and by her pale light sad sights are witnessed. A few yards in front of our batteries, a long line of Confederate soldiers are sleeping, the sleep that knows no waking. They lay in the line of death as they fell in line of battle. Here lay a ruddy and halesome youth, over whose curly locks scarce 18 summers had passed, whilst hard by his aged father sleeps his last long sleep. They all came from the old state of North Carolina, whose brave sons have so often and so nobly shed their warm hearts' blood in the cause of our struggling Confederacy. The fight commenced between Gettysburg and the South Mountains, the enemy evidently endeavoring to gain the gap through which we crossed, and keep us on the south side of the mountains. The hard-fighting Jubal A. Early and the dauntless Rhodes represented Ewell's corps, and wielded their divisions with terrible effect upon the enemy. The enemy are commanded by Meade, who has superseded Hooker. All that we left of the famous Dutch Corps, the 11th at Chancellorsville, met us today, and also today at Chancellorsville it fought badly. Thus it will be seen that 4 divisions of our army fought and whipped 4 corps of the Federals, driving them 3 or 4 miles, capturing several thousand prisoners, artillery, etc. Our loss in some brigades has been heavy. Today the advantage is decidedly on our side, but tonight both armies will bring up large reinforcements, and the issue is still in doubt. It seems to me that Longstreet was much nearer the battlefield than we were, some 20 miles, and with his corps we could have wakened things up. Methinks old Stonewall would not rest on the field of battle tonight, but he would press on with everything in sight and not give the enemy time to entrench. Our troops are in the very best of spirits and are eagerly awaiting the action of tomorrow. God grant that victory may be ours. Thursday, July 2nd. The enemy holds a very strong position in our front, a series of high hills running southwesterly from Gettysburg to the Potomac. We are now maneuvering previous to the grand attack, expected to come off this evening or tomorrow. Longstreet commands our right, A.P. Hill the center, and Ewell the left. This will be a terrible battle, for the position of the enemy cannot possibly be carried by an attack in front. We must depend upon Longstreet and Ewell to outflank them. The Rockbridge artillery was assigned to its position last night. It goes on the left of our lines with Early's division. My company is placed on a high hill, a little south of Gettysburg, and about a mile from the city. We are between the Lutheran Theological Seminary and a large brick dwelling. This position is slightly inferior to that of the enemy, being partially commanded by the range of hills in our front, on which bristle many a Federal cannon. Moreover, we can see but a small portion of the enemy's line. Consequently, the effectiveness of our fire cannot be determined. In front of us is an orchard which greatly obstructs our view. However, we carefully examine the ground, note that portion of the enemy's line on which we are to concentrate our fire, and zealously prepare for a desperate battle. We are supported by Daniel's brigade, Rhodes's division, and are on the extreme right of Ewell's corps. Johnson and Early are on our left, and their lines extend northeast of the city, threatening the Federal right. Our orders are to retain our fire until Longstreet opens from our extreme right. Then we are to open, but to fire slowly and carefully. Never on the continent of America, previous to this time, have a like number of cannon been placed in position. Both the Federal and Confederate armies had brought into play their reserve artillery, and every hill bristles with cannon charged to the mouth with murderous grape. Yet everything is unusually quiet. Men move about carelessly, as if perfectly indifferent to the next few hours. The merry laugh still wreathes and smiles the lips of many a brave soldier boy upon whom will dawn no coming tomorrow, and the joyous tale is told with the same merriment, as if they stood around their cheerful campfires with danger far, far away. Hour after hour rolls on, until we begin to think that Longstreet has deferred the attack until tomorrow, it being understood that he will make the attack on the far right sometime in the afternoon. In front of us, our skirmishers and those of the enemy keep up a continual popping, and first one side and then the other is driven back. I procured a good field glass, and taking position in the cupola of the seminary, watched the movements of both armies with feelings of no little interest. It is now about 3:30 in the afternoon, and we have not much longer to wait. Far away on the right, the boom of a heavy gun betokens the commencement of Longstreet's work. One by one, the artillery on his left joins in with hearty will, and our line becomes a living sheet of flame. A puff of white smoke is seen on the enemy's line, another and another. His line is clouded with the smoke of 300 guns, and the deadly cannonballs come hurtling and screaming through the air, busy on their mission of death. The roar of the artillery is sublimely terrific. Ever and anon, the plunging, rolling musketry fire of the infantry can be heard sweeping down the valley, and the earth shakes and trembles neath the continued shock. Faster fly the death missiles, and more terrific becomes the hoarse bellowing of near 500 pieces of artillery. Now and then the loud shriek or the dying moan of some poor unfortunate betoken the accuracy of the Federal fire. We see no bodies of the enemy directly in our front, but we know exactly where the Federal line is, and our steel rifle guns carry their balls to the mark every time. Orderly Sergeant A.G. Porter of our company falls mortally wounded and is carried off from the guns he has so bravely fought by ever since the tocsin of war sounded throughout the southern land. Several others of my company were struck, but fortunately no one else was disabled. We had a horse or two killed and the caisson shot through by a shell. The artillery fire near us gradually slackened off and towards dusk ceased entirely, but on the right and left increased to an almost superhuman vehemence. My riding horse, hitched to a caisson, broke his bridle early in the fight and ran off, carrying with him all of my plunder. This plunder was my all, consisting of a fine gray English overcoat, 2 fine shawls, one of which I prized very highly, for I had it with me in the John Brown War, and, worst of all, my knapsack, which was strapped to the saddle. Therefore I am bankrupt. But I have one consolation. It doesn't take much for a soldier to resume business. When the artillery fire on our portion of the line ceased, I rode over the field towards the right, looking for my horse, but was unable to find it. There I got mixed up into some of Longstreet's fighting, and not knowing my bearings, I got back to my company as speedily as possible. On the left, Johnson and Early vainly endeavored to force the enemy back from his impregnable position, and night came on. The crash of musketry and the roar of cannon away off on the right, far right and extreme left told that the fortunes of the day were still undecided. About 9 o'clock at night we were moved from our position and marched towards Gettysburg, but soon our orders were countermanded and we resumed our former position. It seems that the enemy was driven from his position on our left, but we failed to hold the ground. At length the firing ceased, and wearily we prepared ourselves for rest. But who can rest upon a battlefield? One may sleep, indeed, but it is not the gentle sleep that brings rest to the weary body. Well, we know the work is still unfinished. and today's fight was accomplished nothing towards the grand result. Well, we know that to gain a valuable victory, we must more than hold in check Meade's powerful army. We must annihilate it, or the war is protracted many years. Victory means recognition. Tomorrow, we must renew the conflict, and the enemy must be whipped, or we will have to retrace our steps back to old Virginia. The loss in the 2nd Howitzers has been little or nothing. The enemy fired at them, but seldom. As to the losses of our army, it is impossible for us to gain any accurate information, but suffice it to say, the enemy holds his position, and we are unable as yet to drive him from it. Tomorrow will decide. Friday, July 3rd. We remained last night in our position of yesterday, though it had become very disagreeable. Many of the enemy, killed in Wednesday's fight, were still lying unburied, and that, together with the stench of putrefied horseflesh, was sickening in the extreme. We remained in this position some hours after sunrise, but were finally ordered to move about 600 yards to our right, where a more elevated position could be had. Only 3 of our guns could be placed in position, our first gun being sent to the rear under the command of Lieutenant Payne. The cannoneers, however, were left on the field and put in other detachments. All of this was owing to a scarcity of men and a lack of ammunition for rifled guns. Far away, on our right, the enemy's line extended, and our line ran parallel with his in a southwesterly direction. Between us lay a beautiful valley of 1 mile in width, about the center of which, and in our front, Rodes's division, the right of Ewell's corps, was posted. This division was somewhat protected by slight earthworks, and had thrown out a cloud of skirmishers several hundred yards beyond. The Federal skirmishers occupied a number of brick buildings in their front and greatly annoyed our men. Dance's artillery opened upon those skirmishers and endeavored to drive them off, but the enemy opened such a terrific artillery fire upon that company that it was compelled to remain quiet until our whole line opened. The heavy infantry fighting was expected to come off in the afternoon, but our artillery was to open sometime before the infantry advance and, if possible, drive off or silence some of the Federal guns. Our battalion was ordered to concentrate its fire on a particular battery just to the right of my company and to pay no attention to the other guns until we had silenced that. According to our gunners, prepared themselves for action, carefully noticing distance, etc. About 2 p.m., we received orders to commence firing, and briskly our men stepped to the guns. Again do our deadly 3-inch rifles and Parrott guns pour into the enemy a closely concentrated fire, and hotly it is returned. We rest a while, the smoke clears away, the Yankee battery has vamoosed. 3 other Federal batteries to the left of the one we were firing upon fired incessantly into us, and as we did not fire into them, their shots were well aimed. Give the Federal artillerists an abundance of time and no danger, and they will fire with great precision. But as soon as we crowd them, their shots fly wild. The cannonballs plunged through our batteries with a whirl that blanched the cheek of many a brave soldier, but the men who had stood the storm of grape at Chancellorsville could not be silenced or driven from their position at Gettysburg. With a stern determination to do our duty, did we turn our guns upon the next battery. Slowly but accurately did we pour into it a storm of shot and shell, but it fought more stubbornly than the first and began to get our range to a nicety. Immediately in front of our guns there was a stone fence, and when our boys were not actively engaged, they nestled down pretty close to it. The firing on both sides was incessant, and the smoke was almost suffocating. Presently an enemy shell came whirling over towards us, and cutting down a tree directly in front of my gun, bursted in such close proximity to my detachment that our escape was miraculous. The tree falling across the fence in such a manner as to completely obstruct my line of sight, I was compelled to mount the fence and cut the tree down, or else change the position of my gun. I chose the former mode, but had nothing to cut with save a small hatchet. Now there was really no more danger on the fence than on the ground, but the bullets and balls seemed 10 times thicker the higher I got, and as my hands were all blistered and swollen by handling the gun trail, I made but slow work. However, I shut my eyes like an ostrich and worked like a beaver. All up and down the line, the cannon are busily engaged in hurling shot and shell over the Federal ranks, and they reply gun for gun. The smoke is so intense and the distance so great that we cannot see the effect of our shots. But we have good ammunition and good guns. Though we cannot hope to break their line with artillery, we may open a way for our infantry to break through. Cease firing. Our infantry is about to charge, and we anxiously gather in squads upon the brow of the hill to witness that charge that will be remembered so long as brave deeds are honored, so long as the English tongue is spoken. Boldly do the troops of Hill and Longstreet advance across the intervening space, and the infantry fight commences. Near and near do they advance towards the enemy's works, and a fire such as man never stood is poured into their devoted ranks. Some waver and fall back. As mountain mist before the summer sun, so melts our line away. Pell-mell, our brave boys are driven back. The enemy leaves his works and with banners flying rapidly advances upon our troops. Our artillery opens to cover the retreat of our troops, but for some unaccountable reason is ordered to cease firing. Quickly, our infantry are rallied in the very face of that sheet of living flame, and with a yell turn upon the enemy, who break and take cover under their works. Again and again this is repeated. Sometimes our men would actually be in their works, but by almost superhuman efforts the enemy would regain them and drive our men away. Those hills, more formidable than the heights of Fredericksburg, cannot be taken, and Pickett's charge has passed into history. Failure is written upon the banner of the Army of Northern Virginia, but the end is not yet. Will the enemy attempt to take our position? If so, he will find that the men who could make a charge can just as gallantly repel one. 'Tis useless to cause the farther effusion of blood by another attempt, and our troops gradually fall back to our former lines, not pursued by the enemy. How my bright anticipations of a brilliant victory have been dispelled by this disastrous charge. Many, very many of our gallant soldiers have fallen, and many have been captured. But if Meade desires to find out the strength of our position, we will show him that the Army of Northern Virginia has in no manner lost confidence in Robert E. Lee, nor in itself. We do not anticipate an attack, for Meade is also terribly crippled, too much so to make an attack upon us without receiving further reinforcements. In this, he has the advantage. He can wait, for reinforcements are coming to him daily. But we must fight or quit. July 5th, at 2 o'clock this morning, we commenced our backward movement towards Old Virginia. It was a murky, disagreeable morning, and as our army slowly marched along the road through the chilly, drenching rain, it was with feelings of the deepest sorrow that I pondered over our disappointed hopes and ambitions. We were undoubtedly severely repulsed, and it is thought that the combined Confederate and Federal losses in this great conflict of Gettysburg will be greater than the combined forces of Cornwallis and Washington at any one time during the great American Revolution. The enemy is in no condition to press us, and we are moving at a snail's pace. The rain soon began to pour, and as I had neither overcoat, oilcloth, or blanket, I was soon drenched to the skin. We will see in a short time if Meade has the nerve to press matters. Napoleon would decide the war today, but Meade is not Bonaparte, and Lee will get his army safely across the Potomac. Finally, the rain slackens and ceases altogether. What sorry specimens of humanity we rebels must have appeared standing in that muddy road with our Confederate gray drenched to our very skins, our slouched hats drawn down over our faces, and our forms trembling and shaking with cold. I had the good fortune to get a late copy of the New York Herald, which I presented to General Lee in person. I was very anxious to read it, but Mass Bob was at best entitled to it. Lee, Longstreet, and Ewell were sitting upon their horses and holding close consultation. I quietly drew closer to them in order to hear, if I could, General Lee's opinion upon the condition of affairs. But no, that was not the subject. Not the great battle that had been, but the fight that Ewell wanted to make. Ewell was actually crying and begging for a fight, just like a schoolboy begging for a bun. "No, no, General Ewell," said Lee. "We must let those people alone for the present. We will try them again some other time." Lee has evinced no haste in crossing the river, and the hostile armies are cautiously watching the movements of one another. A few of our Negro cooks, who were with our wagon train when it was captured by the enemy, escaped, but returned to camp today. Certainly they were the happiest fellows I ever saw, and were greeted with loud cheers by our men. A chance at freedom they had, but they preferred life and slavery in Dixie to liberty at the North. To the great bulk of them, freedom would be an absolute curse. Improvident, happy, and careless, they would ever miss their kind and considerate masters, who had so often watched over them in the hours of pain and anguish. If Meade thinks that Lee's army is demoralized and won't fight, he will be sadly disappointed. We are in a corner. A cautious general would be very careful how he pressed. A great general would attack. A mediocre man would wait. Meade is cautious and mediocre. A great battle is daily expected, and General Lee has issued an order to our troops, exhorting them to contend valiantly for the victory. We will not disappoint our great leader's expectations. In no sense is the Army of Northern Virginia whipped, discouraged, or demoralized.